Phil, you seem about half asleep today after your exploits last Friday. I think you said to me it was the hardest thing you've ever done, the harder than an Ironman. You would choose an Ironman any day of the week over this event that you did last Friday. You want to share with us what you got up to?
Yeah, well, I think given that we're about to do a podcast on mindset in sport, I definitely had to practice what I preach on last Friday. Yeah, I was racing at Tracker, which is like Europe's biggest gravel race in Girona, and it's called the Tracker 360. It used to be 360k. They changed the course this year, a bit more climbing, but it's a 325k race. Yeah, I mean 325k, 4,100 meters of climbing on really brutal terrain. And yeah, do I look a bit tired? Well, this is probably the best I've looked in the last 5 days, mate. Yeah, it's horrendously hard. The dynamic of it, like I'll tell you why. I don't want to say like I'm not belittling. I mean, I've done enough Ironman to know how ridiculously hard they are. But the difference is, you pace an Ironman. This isn't pace. This is a race with a dynamic, and you have to go with it. So it's basically just attritional, and everyone is just broken down. And the last 100 kilometers, it is your mind over your body. You have to want to finish. You have to want to go through it. The amount of self-talk, and look, I'll admit this on the podcast, like I cried twice in that race. I don't know why I cried. I was just riding along, and at one point I was riding with a group, and I was like, I'm glad I've got my glasses on because at least no one can see me. But it was like an uncontrollable, like I am so deep here that like the only thing I can do is cry right now. I felt better for having a little cry. The best bit is I thought no one could see me, and then in the race photos afterwards I realised I had my clear lenses on. So but you were so covered in dirt and grime, I don't think anyone would have noticed. And I don't think anyone with me would have blamed me for having a little cry at the time. We rode in silence for 300 kilometers. It was like you could tell that everyone in the group was just on the limit. And then later on, I rode with one guy between about 220 and 270k. We just shared a bit of the work, and we literally did. I've never met him before, and we did not speak. We just spent 2.5 hours just rolling through. And I think we both knew silence was what we needed. Yeah, great event, and a lot of triathletes giving this stuff a go, and we've obviously done a podcast already this year, haven't we, on being 70.3 fit for everything, and I still believe it. And actually, touching on that, I would say where I was underprepared was like all body fitness. I was probably too cycling specifically fit for the demands of this race, and I'd probably been better off as a triathlete, with like the swim strength in the upper body, and maybe even like the impact from the running and stuff in the muscles would have strengthened me up. So, yeah, good one for the triathletes. And I have had a lot of people reach out already that are joining Tracker Crew for 2027. So I think it'll be a good season starter for a lot.
And probably season ender for for many as well. I'm
Oh
sure.
yeah. I'm done for a while now.
The direction of the podcast today, we're obviously going to chat about mindset and how to kind of deal with the psychological challenges in a race. And you mentioned that, a few tears were shed during it and there was some tough moments. Before the race, did you feel nervous? Did you feel prepared? How did you feel when you stood in the start line?
Look, I've done the race before, so I knew what I was in for. I knew how bad it could get. And I think that helps an understanding it or an acceptance. So like, yes, I was nervous because I knew how hard a day it was going to be. You're not nervous from like when the gun goes, you've sort of made a decision, how you're going to deal with the first 20 or 30k of climbing. You race it in the standards crate. You rate, there's world tour pros there and stuff. You ain't riding with them, even if you wanted to. So, was I nervous? Apprehensive's probably the best word. But I think because I knew what I was getting into, helped to just, and look, I was probably excited as well. It's an incredible event. A lot of these big endurance events we do are amazing to be part of. And obviously I'm fairly long in the tooth at doing this, and I appreciate, being at the race and being in that moment as well. So I think that helps calm the nerves.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? And, done my fair share of racing for sure. I had a number of races where you kind of a little bit overstimulated, aroused, and that's a challenge. A number of races where I've been understimulated and, maybe a little bit of not a lack of caring, but a lack of that kind of nervous energy that creates problems. And one of the things that I always try and work on with my athletes going into a race is, how can we give you the tools so that you're standing on that start line with the right level of arousal? And that's a challenge. You mentioned that you've done it a while, and with an event like the Tracker, you don't want to be absolutely hyped and adrenaline coursing through your veins on the start line, do you? You want to have a kind of relative level of calm, and having raced for so long, having been in sport, you'll have developed your own little tools or ways of approaching races to dial those nerves up and dial them down, so that when you're on that start line, you're ready to go and you can perform the way you want to perform, right?
Yeah, I think so. I was talking to you off air about, I didn't really prepare for this race. I've got some other stuff later in the year that, a bit shorter, a bit faster. It was an adventure. It was a day out. I probably regret not preparing properly for, but I sort of said to you, look, next year I'm actually going to make it a major project, and I'm going to go through a process of having the physiology in the right place, really going through all of the race specifics that mean I can probably ride considerably faster over that course. I would stand on the start line that day more nervous because there's more gone in, and controlling the nerves, because I'm not saying like I don't train hard, but I didn't specifically put my neck on the line for this race. I was probably quite a relaxed approach to training around it. When you're racing for a living, or I go all in on a race, or any of our listeners, it's their A race, and if there's a qualification on the line, or then the level of nerves, pre-race anxiety, or the amount of thought of this all has to go right goes up, and then it's a job to still bring all of that back down just to the right level. And I think different distances require different pre-race approaches. I've just had a couple of guys go pretty well over at Texas the other week, and it's a long race, it's a hot race, you've got to deliver on the run. Therefore, the rest of the day has to be calmer, and methodical and thought out, and just deliver what you're going to deliver to set yourself up for the run. And, one of the guys actually, he won his age group at Texas, and he ran the current world champion in his age group down in the last minute of the race. So, had he executed worse earlier, and, or got too excited in the swim or early on the bike, he'd been on the second step of the podium. So yeah, whereas, something like Mallorca coming up this weekend, the race dynamic, which let's not get into, you've got to make a pack on the bike, but, there is an element of 3,500 people on the bike course. You are going to get sucked along to some degree on that bike course, even if you're trying to hold a legal limit. So the race dynamic in the swim and getting over the climb does mean that there's probably a bit more tension at the start of the race. So, yeah.
That's a whole other topic for another podcast. Make triathlon draft legal.
I'm just not going down that route. I don't know about you, but I talk to these races where drafting is a problem. I always tried to race as honest as I could myself in these situations. I was probably fortunate enough to be near the front of the race and could get away from it. But I just say to people, you try and be, Kona was, a problem years ago with the amount of drafting. You've just got to try and be as honest as you can and come away from it with your head held high, that you didn't go out the way to. And look, I think most Brits are, I think it's a British pride thing. You are trying to be clean. So yeah.
But I guess I'm bringing it back to the start a little bit, and you're 100% right. Different races require a different level of arousal at the start. 100-meter sprint, Usain Bolt, there's going to be one level of arousal. You doing your Tracker, or Ironman Texas, where it's going to be a long day, and you don't want to kind of burn your matches early on. It needs a different level of arousal. I guess a few little techniques that I like to certainly try and teach people going into those races to get to that right level. One, really, really simple, listen to music, and that can help in both directions. If you need to get hyped up, it'll hype you up. If you need to calm down, you can choose some different music to calm you down. Other one, if you do get a little bit over nervous, breathing, which I think we spoke about last week when we were talking about swimming. And then the third one, and this is going back to a little bit what you were just talking about your preparation. Go through your preparation ahead of time. Make sure that you've certainly highlight those sessions that went well. that gave you confidence, and bring that confidence back to the start line. When we race, confidence is such a big part of racing. If you're underconfident, then you're starting battling yourself before you even begin the race. Do
Yeah,
you have any
yeah.
other kind of techniques?
I think I always say to my athletes, it's one I always used for myself, and it's twofold actually why I get them to do this. But I get them to stand on the start line of a major event, and one of the very last things they do. So I know what you're talking about in the nearly in the the week, the 48 hours, the 24 hours, the last hours. You could use your music techniques. I actually did do some breathing stuff last week. I was actually a bit fatigued from the training block I've just done. I sort of only just came round for race day. But one of the things, to calm the nervous system, to just recover a bit more, I did do some like breathing and yoga work, which I don't normally do, but I know it sort of works for me when I do use it. I felt I needed it, and that was just part of the pre-race prep. But I try to get my athletes to when you've trained for an Ironman, for example, you've been out, you've done these long runs, you've done these long bikes, you've been in the open water for 4K. You remember those moments. You can even picture yourself on a ride, on a run. Where did I swim? And I actually get them to stand on the start line and visualize the training they've done and those moments of like, when you've been out and you're 5 hours deep on a bike and you're in the mountains, or you're running uphill 2.5 hours into it, and how it felt. And in training, it probably felt great and you felt confident because no nerves in training, is there? The worst thing you can do is have a bad day and you move on from it. So I try to get them to think about these things, one, from a gratitude point of view, because I think, we're all so lucky to be able to do this stuff that I like them to just reflect on that on the morning of the race, just before the race, and appreciate that the worst case scenario is you've got to do all these cool things during training, even if your race goes badly. Be glad you're there normally in an amazing place with the sun out, life's great. But also just to solidify in your mind that you've done the work and what it felt like, and that you're proud of yourself for having done it. And actually, race day is your chance to just go and showcase what it is you've done to the body and the mind in training. So they should be relatively relaxed. I probably use that more in long distance racing with people because I think it's quite a calming thing rather than something to get hyped up. And I think long distance racing, the longer the race goes, one of the main goals of the day is to finish for anyone. Every Ironman finish, I don't care what level you are, even if you have a bad day, it's still a finish. Whereas I think in shorter course racing, if you absolutely blow and start walking in a sprint distance triathlon, well, you're not going to be just happy with yourself for crossing the finish line, are you? So, yeah.
Yeah, you're spot on. I think one of the things I used to do, and I think one of the challenges that a lot of people face a little bit, I used to always, the week before a race, I'd go a walk 10, 15, 20 minutes and allocate that specific time to think about the race, to visualize it, to understand what I wanted out of it, why I should feel confident, how I want to feel on that start line. And I think one of the really, really common mistakes people make, and I hear certainly some of my athletes speak about it all the time, they deliberately don't think about it because they're nervous. So they, put it to back of me. No, I'm not thinking about it. I'm not thinking about it, and I'll appear on race day, and everything will fall into place. I'll think about it when I really need to think about it. And I think one of the big problems with that is you end up on that start line having not thought about it, having not mentally prepared yourself for how you want to feel and how you're going to handle the nerves that will inevitably come. Whether you want to be hyped up or you want to be calm, regardless, the nerves will come, and your challenge is to be able to control that. But if you've not given it the thought ahead of time, then you're not going to be able to control it. And so if you can give yourself that allocation, and the way I did it was a week leading up to the race, 10, 20 minutes each day, give myself that slot to properly think about it. And if you can do something similar, it'll definitely just get you towards that correct mindset as you get towards that start line. And then when you get there won't be so much unexpected emotion.
Yeah. So you sort of said something that made me think about, your athletes that that don't want to think about it. They're too nervous. I just can't think about it. Like, what is it that they're? Is it they can't think about failure or the outcome? You know, I want to achieve this in the race. What if I fail? I can't think of that. That's so catastrophic that I won't think about any of it. Or or is it that the physical toll of the event is so hard they don't want to think about that? Or is it a mix of these things?
I think it's always I think it always comes down to a fear of failure. People do these races because they want a challenge, right? They're challenging themselves in some way, whether that is to complete a long distance event or whether it's to do something fast. There's an element of challenge there, right? And you wouldn't necessarily do it if it wasn't a challenge. If it was just a fun day out, I'm sure you could go to Disneyland and it would be, much more fun, or just ride your bike with your friends, and the fun comes that way. But you enter these events for a challenge, and when it is an adequate challenge, then there is a very real risk that it doesn't go your way. And I think that's where the nerves come in. I think, the fear that it's not going to go the way that you would like it. Would you agree?
Yeah. I think, look, one thing we should say here is, as coaches, the way you talk about and this podcast has to be wide ranging, because the way you talk about mindset to an athlete is, it's so individualized. It's more individualized than a training plan, I'd probably say, because people's psychology is so different. And I do think that this is a huge part of not just getting the best out of the athlete on race day, but in training, over the years, over the time you work with someone. Yes, people's physiology is different, but given the context of the sport we're doing, you don't train one person like a sprinter and one person like they're doing a 6-day ultra distance race, do you? It's a relatively narrow window. We're taking then slightly wider window of physiology and trying to pull it into this window. Whereas psychology, I mean, as we know, like, we are dealing with all ends of the spectrum in loads of different ways. And as a coach, you're trying to understand that. And I think a good coach they're just very good at reading between the lines and over time knowing how to get someone into the right place. But you mentioned failure as well, and failure, surely there's different tiers of failure within each event. It's just how you determine what failure is. So, like, last Friday, did I fail to ride at my best? Absolutely, yeah. I was not prepared properly for that distance, but I didn't fail to finish. So, it's all just, or, had I failed to finish, I wouldn't have failed to give it my all, because I wouldn't have pulled out till I really had to, absolutely had to. So I think maybe as well, just understanding either what success is, or what the different levels of failure are, might help some people with certain psychologies to feel more relaxed about that.
Yeah. Listen, I think failure as a whole is a whole big topic, right? And one of the things that I really relate to just throughout my career and that relationship with failure, and how it became less of a big scary word, and more of just an acceptance. Like, exactly like you said, where's the tier of failure? Like, there's going to be positives from it. There always is, and if you can use it as a learning opportunity, then it's never a bad thing, even if that learning opportunity only arises years later when you can fully kind of digest something. And you're right, and listen, people's relationships with that, again, it's a very, very individual thing. Some people are really, really sensitive to a little bit, and where do you kind of set those goals, and the work on setting like good, realistic, challenging, but the kind of correct level of goal for somebody, I think, plays a really big part in that as well.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, and I'm sure we'll come on to cliches in a little while on this, but, you're either winning or you're learning. And I think it is a real thing. I know during my triathlon days, my partner at the time used to, and I've had, I'll come up from a background here, but I've had more bad races than good races. Absolutely. I was never scared to fail. I don't think I carry pre-race nerves for other reasons, which we'll get into, especially in triathlon. But I relished seeing how hard I could race, and sometimes it didn't go so well. But I always remember saying to me, like, you like how can you DNF at a race and 30 minutes later be okay, and you chirpy normal self? I'm like, well, because like the training is so hard and you apply yourself so much to that have I really failed? I just raced really hard and it hasn't come off today. But I'm very, very proud of the way I always trained and the way I applied myself to that and still do. And it's definitely one thing I do talk to my athletes about is you can't define yourself by every race outcome. I do believe that you work hard enough for enough years, then every dog has its day, and you pull off, the race results over time. And that's why I guess I didn't let the race result define me as an athlete. It was what I did in my daily habits that defined me and still do probably. So yeah, I think again, this was my way of dealing with failure. I just very quickly reframed it as something else. And therefore wasn't scared of it, nor let it. I was just back to training the next day, like as if it hasn't happened. Let's crack on. What's the next goal? I won't fail next time.
It's a very mature way to think about it and approach it. I would throw that back at you a little bit and say that that's a skill. That is 100% a skill to be able to um, have such a introspective mind to be able to work through all of that and get to a nice healthy place with it. You're not completely absent-minded from the race. So, that'd be one way of it not bothering you, but equally it doesn't mean so much that it completely overwhelms you. You got to a happy place in the middle where you tried really hard to do the thing, and if it didn't come off, it was okay because, you'd, I guess, a good enough relationship with yourself to say that it didn't define you. It didn't change anything, whether that race went good or bad, right?
Yeah. Look, I don't want to belittle the meaning of sport in people's lives because it's huge to us all. It's what gets you out of bed in the morning. It's what drives you forward. I believe in the power of it for, like how it makes you in the rest of your life as well. But yeah, I just think if you can get to a position where you're quite rounded about outcomes, and I guess I don't know. I mean, look, I think getting into coaching also helped me. Yeah, I could very quickly be at a race and have failure and have 3 or 4 athletes on the course doing brilliantly, and have I failed? No, actually, because I am several things, one of which is a triathlon coach, and the success there. And as an athlete, maybe I failed, or even the other way around. You've had an athlete with a bad day, but you've had a good day. And yeah, you are a lot of things, and I think it's just worth remembering. But I think the biggest part is if your commitment to the training as being good enough, then that's very satisfying in itself. You feel like, you trained as well as you possibly could. Therefore, you're proud of yourself. Therefore, you've not failed. So, it's just, I guess that's all part of the, just the try not to define yourself in one moment in time. And look, you could have other periods as well where your race went well, but actually you've had some terrible days in training. Obviously, we deal with athletes who fail in training sometimes as well, and we've got to deal with that. I know we're talking specifically about like racing here as we come into race season. So yeah. So like in terms of like within training, and we go back to specifically to triathlon here, you and I discuss training sometime. We talk, I think one big one is like we talk about the utilization of bricks within training. Do we need to run off the bike, the physiological benefits and negatives of this and whatever. But I guess key sessions to build confidence. And again, this is going to be individual because some people are incredibly confident already with this and will need less. Other people need an awful lot of it. What's your take? What's your take on the type of sessions you might use or the frequency and the way you might use them to build confidence?
Well, I mean, you mentioned bricks, right? So that's the key one. And specificity, I think, breeds the most confidence because you can, it gives you evidence, right? It gives you evidence that you can do the thing. And that is ultimately where the correct kind of confidence comes from. I think it's spot on. Like, listen, it's completely individual. If somebody's, let's just take it in generic terms, but if somebody's brand new and has never ran off a bike before, in order for them to have confidence of running off a bike, then they probably need to have done it a few times. Similar to swimming open water, similar to, the multitude of different things that can happen in an event. likewise, somebody that has done triathlon all their life and maybe realizes the kind of physiological advantages and disadvantages of doing a brick session might not need so many. Maybe, you know, would do one in the lead up. But I think the key part comes down to, you know, giving yourself the evidence that you need in order to be confident. It's something we spoke about a little bit earlier about how key that confidence is come race day. If you're not confident, then you're battling yourself already, and you don't want to battle yourself. That kind of battle within yourself will come in the hard moment, but it shouldn't be at the start. And one of the things you just mentioned there about the correct kind of confidence, which I guess insinuates that there's a wrong type of confidence. And I think some athletes are very, very good at giving themselves the kind of wrong kind of confidence that, you know, almost you can hype yourself up, but without that kind of substance, it can fall apart quite easily as soon as you start to see those little chinks which maybe don't align with that confidence.
Give me a little example of exactly what you mean. Like, how have they hyped themselves up?
I guess, you know, maybe you've been ill for a few weeks before the race, and you know that you need to feel confident before the race because that's part of racing. And so you hype yourself up. You say that it's all okay. You try and trick yourself by looking for sessions that you did maybe a few months ago that went well, and then you get to race day and suddenly the swim is incredibly hard, suddenly the bike power is not there, and you immediately that confidence just completely crumbles because it wasn't built on anything. It was built on tricks that you were playing in your mind.
Yeah, I've actually got an athlete racing this weekend, actually, similar situation. One of the conversations we will have before race day is actually about reframing where they're at with their, you know, they've had quite a bit of time out sick. They're going to do the race anyway. They're going to perform definitely worse than they wanted to a few months ago. It's not been a good build. They've paid for the race, as a lot of age groupers have. They're going to go have a holiday with it. It's about then reinstilling a different confidence, a confidence in, based off where you are at, you will still be able to execute this. If you shift the goal and what success is on the day, and the success is putting a middle distance race into the body so that their body is, you know, in the normal flow of things for the time of year, so they build towards better races in the rest of the year, then again, you could, rather than them chasing, exactly like you said, numbers or performance that may have been there a couple of months ago, you've got to bring them into the race with like a realistic, you know, and I guess get them thinking about things they can do, not things they can't do.
You know, this is such a key thing, I think, for us as coaches on being real with athletes and, you know, kind of being open and honest and telling them where they're at and not feeding into the kind of the hype or that kind of inflated self-confidence at times. I remember vividly, it made me so angry at the time, a race I did back in 2014 it was. I had a really good year in 2013. I had a winter which felt okay, but it just wasn't. It was just missing pieces. It was missing pieces. Went to do the first race and went horrendously. And my coach said to me after the race, "Yeah, I didn't think you were ready." And that, it killed me because I just wished that he'd said it before, because I was confident and the confidence wasn't based on the right thing. And I think, you know, as coaches, we've got a responsibility to tell our athletes where they're at and, you know, try and, exactly as you said, shift that perspective. What should the goal be? What are realistic expectations given X, Y, Z? And that's not to say that you can't outperform them. Of course you can, if things go well. But if we kind of set those unrealistic expectations or we let those unrealistic expectations kind of get ahead of themselves, then all we're doing is setting ourselves up for failure.
Yeah, exactly. You're trying to guide them into best possible outcome for where they're at. I think it's a skill to get it across. Like you said, it's fine to then go and outperform that. You have to set the race up so that outperforming where they're at is actually a real possibility. We're working with intelligent people. I think they get that. Yeah, I always think as a coach, I'm very mindful of what I say on race week to people, because what you could say one sentence and it could be the wrong sentence and it sticks in someone's mind, and you can kill the performance with it. You say the right thing and you can elevate performance. So yeah, it's definitely something, and I think I do. I spend time considering my comments probably a lot more carefully at this point of the year, rather than just having a casual conversation like I would in the winter with an athlete about where training's at and what's next. Yeah. So yeah, and then look, I think just a few other things specific to our sport is, you know, um, make sure you've practiced everything, because it built, and that means if you want to race with a big descent on the bike, go and practice it. I think that people will worry about that. For example, technical descent. What's the weather doing? Is it damp? Is it, go and practice it. Then you've done it. But it also just means that in practice, you will just get better and better at something, whether that's a descent, whether that's transition, whether that's a specific swim start to a certain race, outlaw in 2 weeks, everyone's diving off the platform. And when's the last time you dived into water? Just take away these worries, just go and do 10 dives into your deep end of your local pool, and on race day, it's not in your mind. So they're actually all simple things that, to me, you tick them off so that they're not part of the pre-race conversation. They're just done. You do them all the time. So
yeah, you're spot on. You're spot on. And sometimes these things get overlooked. They're really easy to overlook, actually. Consider this as your reminder to go and get all the little things ticked off, like diving, like descending, like getting in open water. It is just about warm enough now. I know it's starting to have those conversations, even in Scotland, about people getting in open water. So it's around the corner. It's around the corner.
Yeah.
One of the big things that I know you and I have spoke about it a little bit previously, and it's one of the things that I certainly heard probably first from Steve Magnus, which, if you don't know who he is, look him up. He's got some absolutely brilliant stuff on all things training. He's got a really good YouTube channel, actually. Unpicks a lot of quite complicated things in a really simple way. But one of the things that he talks about is the kind of link between performance and the perception of how hard that is. And that's something that we can feel in training, but in particular racing, as in, what do you expect the swim, the bike, the run, what do you expect that effort to feel like? And then how does that compare? And there's one of the things that he speaks about a lot is, whenever there's a disparity, it can influence performance quite substantially. So if, for example, you expect something to feel in control and it feels a bit harder, it will make it feel 10 times harder because you're expecting it to feel easy. Conversely, if you expect something to feel quite challenging, but it feels easier than that, then it'll feel really easy. And it's one of the things, like, when we are getting into races, understanding how things are supposed to feel at various points can be a really, really important factor, so that you're not surprised and ultimately your performance doesn't suffer.
Yeah, and it's going on all the way through a race, isn't it? Swim start 70.3, first 200 meters. It's going to feel hard. You're trying to get on feet. You're trying to find a pack. What does the back end of the swim feel like? Hard in a different way. It's hard in like a durability way. The bike, I think, is where you're probably a little, it's the middle part of a triathlon, so you're not as fatigued as you are on the run. You're also, it's not the start, so there's no like race out the gate. It's probably a more controlled effort, which is probably an easy one to get a perception of in training. I think, going back to the conversation about bricks earlier, 10K in Olympic distance, 21K in a half Ironman or longer in an Ironman, I think understanding, how hard the start of the run needs to feel in order to be executing well, at the back end of the run is also an important skill to have. Plus, also, a mental thing to understand, how to pace these things, but also how to understand how hard these things are going to really be, and then be okay with it. I always talk to athletes, 70.3 wise, once you're 9 miles in my old imperial speak, those last 4 miles are just hell on earth. And you've got to be, of course, with experience, you know what that's going to feel like. But you're newer athletes to the distance or the sport or whatever it is. How else do you get that without a brick? Or and of course, we're not going to run 21K off the bike at race pace, but you will be able to do variants of brick that give people an idea at least how to pace and how that effort is going to change through the run, for example. So yeah, I think that they do, help this perception of effort.
What is then important is how you interpret that information. So it feels hard. Of course, it feels hard when you're getting towards the end of the race. But what does that actually mean? And I think particularly for newer athletes, when something maybe starts to feel hard, the kind of doubts start to creep in, where this is getting really challenging. I've still got X number of kilometers to go. How do can I complete it? Can I get through it? And learning, hopefully through training, what hard is and what that hard actually means for you. Like, how close to the limit are you? Or do you have a long time still left, or are you literally on the limit? And that's quite a challenging thing to understand without having done it, and probably done it a few times. I'm not sure if you do really get close to that in training.
No, I think one thing is that I've always, especially with the run, because look, at the end of the day, the run is where it gets hardest. It is the end you are the most fatigued. It's not to say that, especially in Olympic distance and stuff. I mean, the whole race is hard, but of course, the very hardest moment comes near the end. Breaking the run down into into shorter blocks, so that you can mentally, a marathon, 42 kilometers, it's too long to deal with in your mind. So you deal with 3K at a time or 1K at a time or whatever it is you want to do, or 1 mile at a time in my old school way of thinking. But I don't think you can do that so much on the swim. You can probably do it on the bike if it's laps or it's whatever, but I think the run is where that comes in, and that means that you only have to deal with this like perception of effort. You reset every kilometer or every mile or whatever it is, and then you reframe the next mile. And that's definitely something I use with athletes all the time, is try not to think in too big a chunks. I think the Ironman is the one where don't think of any of it in whole chunks. It's too much to deal with.
No, it completely overwhelm you, isn't it, when you finish the bike and realise you've still got a marathon to run.
Oh,
It's ridiculous
yeah,
in so
yeah.
many ways.
I always remember being in transition. Actually, in fact, this is probably me on the bike course in that race behind me, in France, and coming off the bike, and it's such a hard bike leg, and it was so hot that day, and I was just sat in T2. And I think it must have been my third Ironman. So I was relatively new to it all. It just dawns on you and you go, I'm about to run a marathon now. I am already like smashed. I think it's one of the things that attracts people to the sport. But again, that's a mindset moment of, and I remember specifically thinking it's okay, one foot in front of the other to start with. That's it. Just get out of transition. And that's how much I broke it down. I went, I'm about to run a marathon. Forget that. One foot in front of the other to just leave T2, and we'll deal with the rest as we deal with it. And then it comes in 5K segments out to the airport and back there. So I broke it into 5Ks, but then I broke it into the sprinklers over the thing, run to the next sprinkler, run to the next sprinkler, and taking your mind off it for a minute with is a trick in itself. Giving yourself a break from the mental toll and being able to, so a descent on a bike course, for example, my brain switches from the monotony of holding the power, the effort, the strain, to pure fun. This is let rip. This is amazing. This is great fun. You can do the same with spectators on the course, especially in the longer distance races. Just come off the gas mentally for a second. High five your mates, your teammates, other teammates on the course, cheer them on, because, and I remember it actually when Chris won his first world title at South Africa, and I was 7K to go, and I saw him coming back the other way, and I was absolutely in the hole. I just pulled over to the middle of the road to like cheer him on, and I did slow it. I probably cost myself 2 seconds, but it wasn't just to be nice to him. I needed to mentally come off it for a second because I was suffering so bad. I just need to think about something else for a minute.
You'd be 100% right, and I think one of the big challenges, particularly as we go longer, is on focus and maintaining focus for such a long time. And actually, is it better to, exactly as you say, find those moments where you can distract yourself, you can switch off a little bit from what you're doing, and then switch on when you need to switch on. That balance is quite a challenging thing to get, but I think you're going to be hard pushed, other than if you're in a kind of tightly fought race from start to finish, to maintain that pure focus on the event from start to finish. So
it's a skill, isn't it? So I don't know whether I've ever told this on the podcast before, but I'll tell a little anecdote. It's about the fish. And my uncle is into fishing. I remember my mum talking to him one day and being like, you just go out there all day and sit by the side of the river on your own. And, how is this even enjoyable? I mean, what do you think about all day? And he just looked at her dead blankly and he went, think about the fish. And actually, I heard him say it, and do you know what? In all of the, I was probably fairly reasonable at time trialing during my triathlon years, and it's because I thought about the fish. Like, I could ride for 10, 25, 50 miles with like laser focus on what I was doing, getting every ounce of speed out of you. And I nearly enjoyed the escape from all other distractions in life. And I had the same with swimming. People always like, what triathletes are like, I don't really love swimming. I actually loved swimming. I loved going in the pool. I loved the black line. Laser focus. You're focused on what you're doing. So I do believe you train this into yourself. And then on race day, it really helps, because even in the swim, look, I'm probably talking to people that are pushing the limits here and looking for high performance, but you can't switch off in the swim. You lose the pack, you lose the feet. You've got to stay on it. You've got to stay concentrated. And the bike, to deliver the best bike, I always sort of say, look, I was probably capable of delivering a good bike split when I wasn't fit, because I could manipulate the course to the best of my, I could take every corner perfectly. I could probably put the power out just right. It's because I was concentrating on what I was doing, I think, and then in terms of like going to this whole like perception of effort and the mindset behind that, sitting on the red line, again, it's another thought process that I talk to athletes about. Again, break it down to 1K on the run. You have got to be just on the right side of the red line. You can't concentrate on that for 42 kilometers, but you can 1K at a time, which means you've done it for 42K. But you're always checking it. There's like a self-check. You might check your form, you might check your jaws relaxed, your hands are relaxed, your shoulders are relaxed, and then part of the self-check is, where am I at from an effort point of view? But that's again that mindset of focus and stuff.
It's a fun one. It's a really nuanced one as well. Like, where my mind goes, I'm thinking about some short stuff like a 5K, right? Where you reach that red line pretty quick and you got to try and hold it for as long as possible. And one of the kind of mental techniques there is to switch off a little bit. Not be so present and aware of everything, but to sit in and ride. Try and get dragged along for as long as possible before you need to start making those decisions, and then try and switch back on. So you're right. There's a real challenge there with focus. One thing that I never had the problem with. I never found challenging to stay focused in a race. I remember that kind of come from a swimming background into triathlon and thinking sprint triathlon is 4 times as long as a 1,500 meter swim would take, but it felt just the same. And then doing an Olympic distance, you do a half, do an Ironman, and the time doesn't really change when you're in it, because you are so, I don't know, absorbed at times.
Do you think boredom threshold comes into this though? We've spoken about this before. I think you and I both have very high boredom thresholds, and probably comes from, years and years of training, you know, big long days out on the bike in bad weather, getting it done, you know, newer athletes to the sport. You know, we do live in a different era these days. We're constantly connected, we're constantly stimulated in all areas of our life. And one thing I probably do, you know, rightly or wrongly, training's moved on. You know, some ways rightly, some ways wrongly. You know, best bang for your buck, time crunch life, all of those things. That's the way people are into the sport, and that's the way they know the sport. We came, you know, I certainly was in a very started, you know, back in the day where, you know, in the winter you just rode your bike 5 hours every time you went out. That, you know, it's not realistic for most people, and training science has moved on a little bit from that, but it gave you a high boredom threshold, therefore an ability to concentrate very, very well within training and racing. So yeah, I don't know. Do you think an element of it is that? And do athletes therefore need to go out and do really boring things in order to be able to focus well enough in the race?
Endurance sport is boring. It's incredibly boring. Yeah, I don't think you're wrong. I definitely don't think you're wrong. And I don't know, maybe I'm miserable beyond my years at times. But maybe I just spent too long chatting to you. I don't know. But I agree. I think, I'm sitting here and I'm next to my turbo right now, which, smart trainer. You go on Zwift, you ride your little avatar around. Personally, I hate doing it. Never kind of got into it myself, but you know, exactly likewise as yourself. When I was coming up through the sport, turbos were awful. They were clunky. They were, they weren't fun to ride on. So you use every opportunity to get outside because that was actually the easier thing to do. Sat in your turbo was absolutely miserable. But I mean, boredom, and I think in general, not just in sport, but across a lot of things, the tolerance to be bored is definitely decreased. And listen, I noticed that myself. I used to go out running and never think about, just go run, never brought my phone, brought my house keys, that was it. Now I struggle if I've got a run to do and I've not charged my headphones or something. It'll be a challenge. It'll be a mental challenge.
Steve Magnus did a good post on it the other day, actually, you know, about getting away from your headphones sometimes. Go and ride your, and I've got to say, I took his post liberally, and I actually haven't ridden with headphones for a few days this week, because we are, you know, it dawned on me, you know, 13 hours of riding with no headphones in a race the other day. I'm actually not used to that. I actually, when it got hard later on, I found myself singing to myself in my head because I needed some, and I was thinking about what's on my playlist. You shouldn't really need that. I'll take this a step further. I'll talk about mindset here. I mentioned my former partner earlier, very good ultra runner. Session that she used to do was Super Saturday. Used to lock her in the garage on the treadmill, and to start with was allowed TV, and then we'd take the TV away and she was allowed the radio, and she'd do this was a 5 hour session, 2 hours on the treadmill, 1 hour of lifting, 2 hours back on the treadmill. Then she was allowed the radio, and then closer to the race, nothing. Silence in the garage. Well, I tell you what, it makes you seriously tough. It sounds extreme, but you read, you know, there's a lot of high performers have done stuff like this. If I ride the turbo, I stare at the wall. I don't do anything else because I use it as a bit of mindset training, and I'm quite happy in that environment. Because when you rate, this all comes back to what we're saying about the fish. You know, like you've got to be focused. How are you going to get that if you never can't? You know, if you're never not distracted. So, I think swimming is a great one. If you can overcome what people describe as the boredom of swimming and understand, you know, and you're halfway there. I think swimming's a great opportunity to actually just enjoy the peace and quiet with your head under the water. No one can get hold of you. Enjoy an hour. If that's all you do in the week, you'll be 50% of the way there to this. Go for a run without your headphones. Listen to the fall of your feet on the ground. You know, it's actually like a good thing from a running point of view of, how you're striking the ground, what's your cadence like, are you nice and light on your feet? Yeah, and from a riding point of view, do have some time where you just in a bit of silence, and the turbo. Do you always need a third party app playing in front of you, or could you get a bit of time done staring at the wall? Make you tough. I think that is lost in modern training a little bit, is this idea of how to toughen people. And yeah, it sounds like old school torture, but I think it works pretty well.
Yeah, and listen, there's always that balance, isn't there, between making something enjoyable and making it making you the best athlete that you can be. And everybody's in the sport for a multitude of different reasons.
I mean, you flick it the other way, and let's just, just the debate on the turbo and using third-party apps. I mean, like the use of the turbo is so time savvy for people. If it makes them train more and be more engaged, and I would say Zwift has probably moved the general level of cycling on. I think it's an absolute game changer. But I do think, as with anything, you just have to just probably step away a little bit sometimes as well, and then go back to it. So it's just balance with everything, isn't it?
100%. 100%. Bring it back to races, and there's always a crunch point, right? No matter which race you do, there's always a crunch point. For you and Friday, there's probably several crunch points, given the length of it. But there's always that point where you start to question yourself. That little voice starts talking in your head and says, I don't think you can do this. I think you're going to have to slow down. I think you're going to have to stop. Don't think you're going to get to the finish. Whatever that is. How do you combat it?
You push it further down the road. I've been there enough times. I was there on Friday a few times. So I genuinely did have a moment at about 200k into the race on Friday where I think I was physically done, and it becomes a mental game from there. What I decided was that, because I probably had an opportunity at an aid station to pull the plug. A lot of people pulled out at that aid station just from being done. What I decided to do was move through that point in the race as quickly as possible and then think about this again a little bit further down the road. Of course, I could turn around and go back if I really wanted to, but because I'm already 5 minutes down the road heading in the other direction, there's a huge part of your brain 5 minutes past the point of where I can pull out and 5 minutes before, there's two different subconscious things going on. The minute you've got past that point, so let's put this in terms of like a dark moment in an Ironman on the run. How do you push that down the road? Some of it comes from experience. Some of it comes from knowing, actually, if you refuel, slow down a little, you'll move past this moment. But I nearly try to like sort of visualize being already past it. So I will be okay. This will end. It's temporary. Everything's temporary. And whilst we're talking about this is about mindset, about suffering or pain or a very difficult moment in the race, everything we're doing is actually relatively short in the grand scheme of your life. So, when you're, in miles to go in an Ironman, for 90 minutes, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, it will be over. And that's definitely something that I always remind myself. And actually, like I said, on a smaller scale, I'll probably feel better in 5 minutes. So I'll deal with it then. And actually, in 5 minutes, you're quite often in a better place. And that might be because you've made an adjustment. It might be because you were just going through one of those moments.
What's the saying? A moment of pain or a lifetime of suffering. Take the pain. Take the pain. The one that I always try and use is to try and predict some of the things that your mind's going to say to you. You'll have been in hard moments during training sessions. You'll have been in hard moments during other parts of your life. Try and picture what are those things that crop up. What is it that your mind tries to tell you when you're not doing, or when you're struggling? What's the little devil saying? And come up with a list of answers ahead of time. That rebuke that little voice. And if you can do that ahead of time, because it's very, very challenging when you're in the thick of it, to have that mental fortitude to kick the barrel down the road, to keep on going, to come up with one of those answers. So if you can do it ahead of time, then when it comes up, you've got a pre-made response. And if you can practice that response a few times ahead of time and make it a little bit more ingrained, it becomes a much smoother process.
Yeah, I think as well, like, just think, like, adding to what you were saying there, if you understand your why are you doing this? Why do I want this? What does it matter to me? That also, that if you already understand that before the race, for example, like you were sort of saying there, in that moment, you can very quickly draw down on that and understand, remind yourself of why, remind yourself it's temporary, remind yourself of what coping mechanism you've put in place for it. And these things become automatic then. They become automatic with many years of experience, but I do think, so I haven't been to the place I was in on Friday for a couple of years. Because of that, I was in a very long race. I had time to think about these things and recall, but they weren't instant. So effectively I didn't prepare as well as if me and you had this discussion last week, and I went into this race and I'd have gone, okay, I know what my strategy is for coping when things get tough. I know what my why is. I probably hadn't thought about that. I certainly thought about it while I was riding the other day. I guess as with your athletes, you're a little bit more in tuned in this because, we know it's the physical side and then the mental side. But yeah, a simple question to all athletes heading into race season is, what's your why? Understand that, and you'll get through the tough moments a little easier. You may also maybe just have a little bit of less pre-race anxiety if you understand your why as well a little better.
Yeah, fully agree. I guess the last little thing from me, I was actually doing a race myself on Friday. It was a lot shorter than yours, Phil. It was a 5K, and I struggled with it from a mental perspective. And I've struggled the last couple of races from a mental perspective, actually. When it gets hard, the grit's not the same as it was a few years ago. The kind of that giving up point happens earlier.
Is this because you're what? Is this because you're?
I think it's from a multitude of reasons. Yeah, for sure. I don't care as much as I used to, quite frankly, which is not a helpful thing in the race. But the other part of it is it's not practiced. I've done very, very little racing in the past few years. And when you don't practice these things, you regress. You get worse at it. When you practice them, when you go through them, you get better at it. And I guess there's a little reminder there to do hard things.
Yeah, I mean, especially you're talking about a very short effort in the endurance world terms there, and I absolutely think you mentally and physically, that comes from doing it repeatedly. Your body and your mind really have to cope with that, and it's a real skill. But it's interesting you say your why has changed, of course, because you've gone from professional athlete to this is a hobby, but. There'll be people listening to this that have maybe been in the sport a long time and their why has changed as well. I know people, probably even myself actually a little bit. But yeah, just thinking about some people I've worked with for a long time and their why is different now. But I don't think it means they should be willing to not suffer and not push, but they just have to reframe and understand where they're at on the journey. If they've been in it 20 years and they're chasing different things and different outcomes and their life is different. Just reframing of the why. So come on, tell us what time you ran anyway for 5K.
15:30.
15:30. Terrible, shocking. I'd be embarrassed if I ran that. And what was your PB when you were
13:45.
13:45. It's a big difference.
Yeah. So as ridiculous as it sounds, when you asked me that, I felt embarrassed to say, which is
but
ridiculous.
Look again, endurance sports
you set these norms for yourself. You hold yourself.
Yeah, you hold yourself to your old standards, to your own standards, and that's the drive, isn't it? And that could be that you could be having a conversation with an athlete whose PB over 5K is 23 minutes, and they're a bit out of shape, and they're running 26, and they don't want to speak. Well, everyone comes from different backgrounds, challenged in different ways, different genetics. Yeah, just because both your times are ridiculously quick there, most people would dream of a 15:30. But yeah, it's you versus you in many ways, isn't it? Especially when it's not a job, it's a hobby. So whereas it's probably not you versus you when it's your actual living. So yeah, look, rounding it up, I think going into races in the next few weeks for people, your preparation, thinking about the mental game, thinking about the types of training you do that builds confidence, practice your skills, develop the skills so that things become second nature, takes all your worries away. And then, all the mental strategies we just spoke about there, understanding your why, hyping yourself up or calming yourself down. And that's not race distance dependent. That's also personality dependent as well. And I guess starting to think about this a little bit more. I think a lot of people are thinking about the training and then they're actually turning up for races mentally not in a very good place. They're in a bit of a mess because they've not thought it through. They've not put as much into the mental prep. And I think your tip earlier was excellent. 10 or 15 minutes a week for a few weeks before the race, start to think things through, whether that's visualization or whether that's the things that are bothering you. Let's speak to my coach. Let's break those down. And you won't get this right in in one, you won't change this. This is an ongoing process over time to discover yourself. And maybe like I talked about, I got to the point where I didn't let failure define me. I nearly used it to like build myself back up the next day if I failed, and you take a positive out of a poor situation. So yeah.
Yeah, and I guess the closing words from me, it's all a skill. Everything's a skill. We train, we know how to improve at training. You repeat, take the stakes a little bit harder every time. And it's the exact same in the mental game. It's a skill, and you have to practice it. If you don't practice it, you will not get better at it. And then I guess last little thing, us as coaches, we speak about these things a lot, and we do a reasonable job about speaking about these things on the surface level. But for anything a little bit deeper, don't be afraid to reach out to a psychologist about these things. They can be really, really useful in unlocking, or even giving you a bunch of skills that you didn't realize, and maybe we've not mentioned today, to help you get that performance that you want to get, and maybe even develop a better relationship with the sport as well.
I second that. I used a psychologist myself over time, and to deal with some anxieties around sport. And yeah, we're offering advice off just our experience in the sport and what we speak to athletes about. But there's another level above this, and we're far from absolute experts. But it's your journey as well. Use your coach, use your teammates, use experts in the field to understand it. I actually think in age group racing, this is very under thought about. It's nearly like, well, you've either got the right mindset or you haven't. Crack on. We're seeing age groupers using strength and conditioning coaches, nutrition coaches like ourselves. How many are using psychologists? Let's leave it there.